So welcome everyone. We're so glad to see so many people joining us today for this webinar on early warning and resilient systems in sub-Saharan Africa. And this event is co-hosted by the SCALE and ProWash Awards and funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. I'd like to extend a special welcome to those French speakers who are joining us today. We'd like everyone to be aware that we are providing French interpretation for this event. If you'd like to follow the event in French, you just need to click on the small globe at the bottom of your screen where it says interpretation, as you can see on the slide here, and then select French. Once you've selected French, you can choose to either mute the original audio or you can hear it in the background at a lower volume. You can also find a link in the chat box for the presentation slides in French, which will be dropped in shortly, so that you can follow along on that version instead. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please just send a chat message to ProWash and we'll do our best to assist you. Before we begin, can I please ask that everyone attending introduce themselves in the chat box and just drop in your name and where you're joining from so we get a better sense of who all's on the line with us. If you have any questions during the webinar, we'd like you to post your questions in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please do not include questions in the chat box because they might get lost in the other discussions happening in that space. All questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And any questions that we don't get to by the end of the webinar will be included in a question and answer document that we'll share on the FSN Network website following up this webinar. Note that you can also upvote questions in the Q&A box that you would like us to answer, not just flags which are priority questions amongst this group that should be bubbling to the top for getting answered during this session. So this webinar will share innovative advances by two projects focused on early warning, climate change, resilience, and food security in sub-Saharan Africa, one in East Africa and the other one in Southern Africa. We'll be having two presentations followed by a Q&A session. Allow me first to introduce myself before we jump in. My name is Kristen Lambert, and I'm the program director at Mercy Corps for the SCALE Award. And today I'll be co-presenting with Jude Cobbing, the Senior Specialist for Water Infrastructure and Governance for ProWash.
Hi, everyone.
For those of you who might be unfamiliar with the ProWash or SCALE, in a nutshell, SCALE is an initiative funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. And our goal is to enhance the impact, sustainability, and scalability of BHA-funded agriculture, natural resource management, and alternative livelihood activities in emergency and non-emergency contexts. SCALE is implemented by Mercy Corps in collaboration with Save the Children. ProWash and SCALE are quite similar, kind of sister awards in a way. ProWash is also funded by BHA and is led by Save the Children. And the aim of ProWash is to provide support to implementing partners in order to strengthen the quality of WASH interventions through capacity strengthening, knowledge sharing, and applied WASH research opportunities. To learn more about either of these awards, you can visit the FSN Network website by clicking the links that you see now in the chat box. So to kick us off today, I'd like to introduce the first of our speakers. We have Bronwyn Moore, Deputy Chief of Party on the Joint Emergency Operation, or JOP, for CRS in Ethiopia. In this role, Bronwyn is responsible for providing strategic direction for program technical teams across the JOP consortium. We also have Ashanafi Alemu, who is the CRS Technical Advisor for Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction on the Joint Emergency Operation Program. Ashanafi chairs the Early Warning Technical Working Group for the consortium, strategizing on the program's early warning and market data collection, analysis, and information uptake. So with that, Bronwyn Ashanavi, I'll turn it over to you for our first presentation.
Thank you, Kristen. The Joint Emergency Operation, JEOP, is CRS's longest standing humanitarian programme, responding to needs of transitory food and secure populations across Ethiopia. While we are now in the 9th year of implementation under the current award, the JEOP has a much longer history dating back to the famines of the 1980s. JEOP's structure is designed to accommodate to evolving need, extending geographically and numerically as the context requires. Each year, targeting recurs on a 6-monthly basis, and caseloads vary from 1.5 million to over 5 million people annually. Now, as JEOP responds to crisis in Tigray, the caseload is the highest in the programme's history. JEOP is implemented hand-in-hand with the government of Ethiopia, and CRS collaborates with a consortium of international, national and church partners, alongside a growing number of technical service providers. JEOP is predominantly a commodities pipeline distributing imported bulk wheat, yellow split pea and oil. JEOP also has a growing cash component. This includes cash in lieu of wheat, aligned with the seasonal calendar in areas with functional markets, transportation top-ups for households living significantly more than a 2-hour walking distance from distribution points. Underpinning the transfer programme, JEOP has a robust early warning and market monitoring system to mitigate potential market impact of transfers, be it cash or commodity. As JEOP seeks to protect lives and livelihoods, database decision-making is critical, facilitating intentional, operational and programmatic adaptations to meet evolving need. Next slide, please. JEOP's early warning system has been in place since 2012 and now includes 16 indicators. These continue to be refined and updated over time in response to contextual challenges. These indicators are collected across 16 of Ethiopia's 11 regions, which includes a geographic coverage of around 75% of the country. Data collection includes secondary level data from government offices and primary sources, including markets, observation and interviews. And since 2012, JEOP has also included household level data collection. Data is sent to CRS via SMS, telephone or Excel as the context allows. And following data quality checks, cleaning and analysis, JEOP disseminates this data in several forms, including an interactive dashboard, monthly analytical narrative digests, online discussion sessions, as well as raw data sets to food security partners, including WFP, USAID and FuseNet. Narrative reports present overarching trends at regional level and make suggestions of adaptations. The online dashboard, meanwhile, enables users to generate information more specific to their operational area. JEOP's early warning system has helped to trigger rapid assessments, anticipate ad hoc requests, validate caseloads, and contribute to National Government of Ethiopia seasonal assessments. Next slide, please. As you can see from the slide, JEOP early warning system and market monitoring collects information from a wide variety of areas. Across these areas, each abnormal event, be it below average crop planting or unusually high school dropout rates, is monitored and implications are documented for food security analysis. Data feeds into JEOP's overall food security analysis thanks to a weighted score analysis tool. And thanks to a body of data collected since 2012, JEOP was able to compare data points, such as price of a particular cereal in a particular woreda against the previous month, previous year, 5-year average, or a neighbouring woreda or another region. JEOP is also working to create a new predictive function. Today, we will focus on the market monitoring component in particular, and I will now pass over to my colleague Ashanafi for more details. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Bronwyn, for your presentation of the JEOP early warning system. Initially, JEOP's data relied on wholesale price of staple food grains. However, starting 2020, JEOP also introduced retail price monitoring using the CRS's market guideline. This helped JEOP monitor an expanded list of commodities, including pulse, oil, and vegetable. Previously, JEOP monitors only staple food crops and its operation areas. JEOP also collects information on how availability changes and also asks vendors perception of the cause of lower availability if there is a shortage in availability of commodities. Job also monitors prices of medium-sized goat and sheep, and also lower wage rates in its operation area. Next slide. Yeah, when selecting markets for the monitoring, Job is strategic in incorporating different kinds of markets in the supply chain based on the capacity of markets and integration with local markets. Both central and local markets are included. This helps Job identify unusual patterns and investigate causes for unusual patterns. Job collects weekly market data for wholesale prices and also bi-weekly data for retail prices. Next slide. Now I will also briefly show you the different types of analysis Job conducts. And these are the 5 types of analysis Job conducts. And in the next slide, we'll see it in a little detail. Next slide. Yeah, this is the first kind of analysis that Job conducts once the data is collected. So firstly, price change that exceed established threshold levels are highlighted and identified. This table is copied from the Job Early Warning and Market Monitoring dashboard. And the table compares price change with a threshold set for the specific month. As you can see here, the first column shows regions, list of regions Job is operating. The second shows list of markets Job collects information. But this is not the full list. It was cut to fit the slide. And columns 3 to 5 shows commodity prices collected from January to March. And the last 3 columns shows price change calculated with another, with the previous month. And as you can see in the last 3 columns, there are red flagged prices which exceeded the defined threshold. In this case, Job's price threshold for 3 months should not exceed 10%. This is because these months follow harvest season and historical data shows price remains stable during this period. Therefore, price increase above 10% in January, February, and March will be flagged and causes will be investigated. Next slide. Okay, this is the second type of Job's data analysis method. And then Job uses a second analysis comparing price with a calendar. So the first one is calendar that you are looking on the screen, and the second one is the index, the price index. This analysis will be most appropriate where there is shortages in historical data, especially comparing price with the calendar. With current expansion of Job into new waradas and conflict-affected Tigray, Job using this analysis. Let's see how this method helps us market data analysis. As you can see in the last row of the calendar, the arrow shows stable in January and increasing in February and decreasing in April. This shows the trend for a specific market. For example, when we see a high price increase in our data in the month of October, we will not be surprised because the arrow in October shows upward direction. That means price increase is expected and normal. However, if the rate exceeds the threshold, Job investigators, because that could lead to programming action and also into food security analysis that will contribute for the early warning. The second graph, the index line, is a more powerful tool. I'm speaking about the graph on the right side because we say this graph is powerful because it shows the percentage price increase anticipated at a certain period. For example, in December, we expect at least a 20% price increase as per the normal trend. Anything above this will be investigated, and it will be captured in the food security analysis and will contribute for the early warning preparedness. Next slide. This shows also the third type of analysis that JOP conducts, and these two graphs are copied from the JOP early warning and the market dashboard. These two waradas or districts are in Oromia region in Ethiopia. They are among 125 JOP operation waradas currently JOP is implementing. Let us see what's the price tell us for these two waradas, for Oromia and Negele Arsi. These graphs compare 2021 price in red line with the previous year price shown as a black line, and with the 5 years average, which is in the bar. As you can see, the 2021 price is high in both areas as compared to the average trend. This indicates something unusual is happening in these waradas because the current year price, the one in the red, is showing an upward increase, but the trend, the 5-year average, the bar shows a declining or normal trend between January and March. In fact, many of JOP waradas showed similar unusual trend. Reasons could be below average harvest from her season, which was in October to November, and high inflation the country is experiencing. Currently, it exceeded 20%, and the government's unsuccessful food import effort to stabilize the market, conflict affecting food flows from surplus to deficient areas are the measure for the price increase that we have seen this year, starting January. This information is helpful to strengthen JOP's preparedness for worse times ahead and adjust programming to contribute to address market issues as well. Next slide. Yeah, this is a fourth kind of analysis JOP conductors for the market data. This shows in the graph you can see price trends in 3 markets in Haromaya, Qarsa, and Kurfa Challe. Haromaya market represented in blue is a supply market. These are very close markets for each other. And the other two are local markets. Normally, the price in local markets is expected to be higher compared to the supply market, except in major harvest seasons. If we see such a trend, we can say that the markets are integrated. This means we can predict what is happening in local markets by observing the price and the supply markets. In our graph, we see unusual price spike in Qarsa in the month of July, especially in July. This was caused by a desert locust infestation. So when we see some kind of unusual trend among the integrated markets, we'll investigate and we can find similar causes like the cause we find for the Qarsa. Next slide. This is another kind of analysis JOP conductors using this market data and comparing it with the prices of sheep or goat and also labor wage. The first graph is the terms of trade. for food and for short, and the second one is a term of trade for labor and food. Job is interested in this analysis because most poor and vulnerable householders sell small ruminants and engage in labor work to supplement incomes. The number of people doing this increases, especially in lean seasons. Knowing the ratio of food householders can buy in exchange to short or labor indicates their ability to access food. The graph also helps to compare this with the 5 years average. The first graph shows the terms of trade for medium-sized short and for 50 kg of staple food. We chose 50 kg because it is the one-time purchase householders can make in a market and manageable to carry home. However, a household of 5 members should buy at least 100 kg in a month. As a result, we set the threshold of the ratio at 2. So anything below 2, the ratio of 2 indicates that householders can't buy 1 month's food with a sale of goat or short. Imagine how much sheep or goat they would need to sell if the lean seasons extend to 4 or 5 months. Normally, poor householders do not have many ruminants to sell. So this shows the extended stress householders are experiencing to access food. Okay, let us read the graphs. I'm reading the first graph, and the red line in the first graph shows short price. It is on decreasing trend, and the yellow line shows the food price. It is on increasing trend. As you can see, food price is increasing, and short price is decreasing. We have also bars showing terms of trade. The light blue shows the 5-year average, and the blue shows the current year. And the current year appears lower than the average. This shows that householders' access to food is low compared to the 5-year average. We can do similar observation for the labor, the graph on the right side. For the labor, the assumption is that if someone works for 15 days in a month, how much food could he buy for householders? For the current year, it is low by 70% even in March. This is due to various factors such as conflict or COVID-19, where labor seekers could not move freely from place to place for work. Competition for labor work is tough, as everybody wants to access local opportunities. This contributed to decrease wage rate in job operation areas. This kind of analysis is helpful to understand situation across operation areas. This information also feeds into jobs food security analysis and contributes for classification of the food security severity of whereas, and therefore for early preparedness for worsening conditions to come ahead of time. Next slide. Now let us see the jobs dashboard. This is an online and interactive dashboard, and this shows the first page that you will be directed from the landing page. As you can see here, one can access analyzed early warning and market information by clicking tabs on the top. The dashboard provides options users to generate information by their location. This could be possible by selecting options in the blue shaded areas in the right place. When one selects locations, the graph adjusts for that specific locations, or any other visualizations will adjust for that selected location. This allows jobs partners to generate specific information for their operation area and conduct discussion and actions at local level. Next slide. Yeah, this shows that anybody or jobs partners can also adjust their graphs by location and by different staple crop types. They can select for barley, for maize, for sorghum, for wheat, depending on their need. Next slide. Yeah, here for the interest of many people in the WASH area, we have also attempted to make some comparison between water availability and the price trend. The graph shows positive correlation between the number of waradas, that means district, reporting decreasing water availability and also price increase. The first graph shows a 2020 data, a previous year data for the period of January to March. As you can see in the first graph, the number of waradas reporting decreasing water availability increased from around 12 in January to 28 in March. And price increased by more than 10% during a similar period, as you can see in the next graph following the arrow. And the below graph also shows similar trends that we observed in 2021. What strengthens the fact is that job operation areas saw low price increase, which is below 6% in 2018 and 2017. And similar period between January and March, where job waradas have not reported a water problem at all. So in conclusion, job conducts market monitoring to facilitate database decision-making, informing assistance modality, and also adjusting rate, timing, and location for food assistance program and for cash intervention, and prioritizing interventions effectively according to evolving needs. And also the data also feeds into the food security analysis system that will help for generating early warning information. Thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn and Ashanafi, for that presentation. I'd like to introduce the speakers of the next presentation. Mark Thompson has over 35 years of specialist knowledge and expertise in the use of remote sensing, EO tools and data sets for natural resource and conservation mapping, watershed and water resource management, and catchment scale land use and land cover mapping in a wide range of Southern African environments. Jason Hallows focuses on the research, development, and application of water-related real-time decision support systems, specifically in data-poor environments using remote sensing and supporting technology. Mark and Jason, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jude. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Myself and Jason, my colleague, will be talking about the South African National Water Quantity Monitoring System. It's a monthly water resource monitoring capability that has been operating for several years now, and we're going to showcase that as an example of an early warning system. I'm going to take you through both the reason why we developed it in terms of the need for water resource monitoring, more in-depth look at the actual South African Water Monitoring Service, then to give you an indication of how this kind of service can be scaled up, both in terms of geographical coverage and transported to other geographical areas in terms of the technologies that have been used. And then probably most importantly, Jason will finish off by explaining how we can actually convert the water information or the water data into more important intelligence, which can be based or used to actually base decision-making on. Next slide, please. Thank you. South Africa, like many countries, is a water-scarce country. So therefore, water is a real critical resource in terms of a wide range of applications and requirements, from economic planning through to the ability for ecosystem services to function correctly. So having the ability to actually monitor the water resources at any given time across the country is very, very important when it comes to strategic planning and management activities. Next slide, please. So what has happened is that we have now got an operational water monitoring capability, and the fact that we can now generate very detailed monthly high detail level information on the water resources that are available to the country means it can be integrated with a wide range of other data sets and information to actually start to generate what we call actionable intelligence when it comes to decision making. So that is where we stand at the moment, and I'm going to take you through the actual system now. Next slide, please. So the system itself is actually called the South African National Water Quantity Service, Mzansi Amanzi locally for short. And it's a joint initiative between the South African National Space Agency, which is representing the South African government, and the two companies that myself and Jason work for, GeoTerra Image and EcoSource. What the system does, it generates every month a national picture of the surface water resources right across the country, coast to coast, border to border. Okay. What makes it very different from many other water monitoring services is that not only does it tell you where the water is located, it also gives you a very detailed indication of exactly how much water is available by actually modeling the water volume in several thousand individual reservoirs or dams or man-made impoundments. Next slide, please. The system has been developed using the latest cloud-based technologies. It's completely automated. The way in which it works, it looks at the satellite images that are acquired over the whole country within one given month, and it uses those to automatically detect and map the surface water features. And then that is followed by another set of automated modeling procedures that are used to determine and report the water volumes in individual dams and reservoirs. We report the volumes only for man-made features, not for natural features. The great advantage that the system offers is that it doesn't require any in situ or field observations or data collection. It's completely independent of any external data requirements. So it's a fully automated system that is literally reliant on the satellite imagery. And we are using the services reliant on the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 satellite systems, which are public access satellites. Next slide, please. Every month, the service creates a wide range of data that is available then for the end users. The primary output to begin with is obviously the digital map, which is actually a representation of all the surface water features, both natural and man-made, right across the country. The smallest feature that we detect in terms of a water feature is around about 0.1 of a hectare, and that links to the 20-meter resolution of the source Sentinel-2 satellite imagery that we're actually using. Can you just go back one slide, please? Whoops, not quite sure. We're jumping ahead here, Suzanne. Thank you. As I said, the smallest detectable water surface is about 1.1 of a hectare, so it's very detailed spatially. What we then do is to report the water volumes for individual dams, and we report that for over 30,000 dams individually. There are significantly more dams for which we actually monitor the water volume and report it. These dams are typically less than 25,000 cubic meters in terms of volume at full capacity. For those dams which are too small to report at individual levels, we actually merge them all together and report the volumes for what are known as quaternary catchments, which are the smallest kind of management hydrological catchment unit we use here in South Africa. The system itself generates digital maps, so they're obviously GIS compatible in terms of spatial mapping, and a whole suite of data spreadsheets to document both the current and the historical water volumes and water area. The service itself has an archive going back to January 2016, which was the operational source date of the Sentinel-2 satellites that we're actually utilizing. And there are also 2 public viewing websites that we host to allow the public to interact with the data, although the data itself digitally is actually distributed to the government departments by the South African National Space Agency. The system as it stands can be considered a near real-time system in the sense that although we publish monthly representations of the water inventory, the actual monthly publication is literally within 5 days of that month finishing. So by the 5th or the 6th of May next week, the data for April 2021 for the whole of South Africa will be open and ready for people to use. Next slide, please. Okay, this is one of the two websites that I mentioned. This is the website that represents the surface area, and this is a public access service. In the right-hand side, you can see several buttons which allow you to switch on and off the different months, the most recent 3 months. So there you have January, February, and March 2021, and the long-term one represents the maximum amount of water recorded since the service started, going back to 2016. So I'm just going to jump in now and go to a more detailed picture. If I have the next slide, please. So I can zoom into one of several thousand individual dams. This is actually the Vaal Dam. It's one of South Africa's larger man-made dams. It's just south of Johannesburg. The blue area represents the surface water for March 2021. You can clearly see the rivers that are flowing into the dam and the main Vaal River flowing out of it towards the upper left corner. And obviously then all the small farm irrigation dams and water feeding units in the surrounding landscapes. What we can do is to switch on all of the previous 2 months as well. So if I have the next slide, please. And the long-term extent. So by changing the colors, what you can actually see here is it showing that the dam itself is actually starting to dry out. The surface area is reducing as we're going into the dry winter period. And you can see a small green area in the middle at the bottom of the dam. And that is an area that was obviously wet at some point in the last 5 years, but hasn't been covered in water in the last three months. Next slide, please. What we're doing now is to jump to the volume dashboard or volume website, which is linked to this. So all these volumes are determined from the actual surface areas as shown in the previous website. What you're seeing at the moment on the left-hand side is the green boundaries are the primary hydrological catchments across the country, and the little bar graphs inside each of those give you an indication of the water volume in each of those primary catchments. Whereas on the right-hand side, you can see both the statistics, and the graph below is actually showing you the most recent trend in national water availability. This is actually from March 2021, which so far has been a very wet year. And that means the summer rainfall area, which is actually shown up by the very blue graphs, we've actually got quite a lot of water in the landscape ready for use. Whereas if you compare that to the bar graphs for the southern catchments, which are down towards the Cape Coast and so on, that is a winter rainfall area. Their resources are quite low at the moment, and it's obviously waiting for the winter rainfall period to start. If we have the next slide, please. This is actually showing you the same situation from last year and how informative this can be in terms of comparison. So last year, April 2020 was much drier than what we've experienced this year. And that is represented both in terms of the lack of color and content in the bar graphs all over the country, and what you can see in the lower right-hand graph, where you can see a much lower trajectory in terms of actually tracking the national water picture. What I'm going to do now is to use the same website and zoom into an individual dam to show you the kind of information that's also available. So the next slide, please. This is again the Vaal Dam that I showed previously. This is actually showing you the Vaal Dam for March 2021, and the graph on the lower right corner is now showing you the change in water volumes since around about October 2020 to its present condition last month. So you can see that as a result of the very heavy rains that we've had in the preceding wet period, we've actually managed to fill that dam up, and it's actually now standing at just about full capacity compared to where it was 5 or 6 months ago. Next slide, please. This is the same Vaal Dam, but I've switched on now a different tab. So the graph at the bottom is now showing the long-term trend in terms of volume for that graph. And you can clearly see, first of all, on the extreme left of that graph, the very low values associated with the severe 2017, 2018 drought that Southern Africa experienced, and how the dam has been filling up and actually to its present condition at the beginning of 2021. Next slide, please. This is one that may be more familiar to you. This is actually Three Waters Kloof Dam, which is very close to Cape Town. It's in one of another dam out of 30,000 that we can actually investigate. And what I'm just doing here is to show you the long-term trend, where you can see on the bar graph at the bottom, the point where, again, during 2017 drought, we got very, very close to that dam running dry and the taps running dry in Cape Town. So it contains a host of information that can be turned into intelligence in terms of actually seeing what happens and how the water landscape changes in terms of rainfall. Okay, next slide, please. What I'm going to do now is just show you very quickly, or give you an idea of how we actually model the volumes. What you're seeing now is a digital topographic map. So the red represents higher areas, the greens and the blue represent lower areas. And typically what you will find in a given situation where a dam exists is that the actual dam surface represents a flat plane in a topographic map. What we do is to use the surrounding landscape profiles to actually model the bathymetry in a particular dam location by actually extending the profiles from the surrounding terrestrial land into the water body. Next slide, please. So what you see here is a modeled bathymetric representation of what the bottom of the dam actually looks like. We can then use that to actually work out what are called height area volume sort of models, where we can actually, next slide, please, we can actually infill the actual dam with different surface areas of water. And because we know the bathymetry or the contours under the water, we can work out the volumes. And so from that, we can actually develop a series of modeling algorithms that allow us to actually predict and model the volume for any given dam based on its surrounding topography for whatever level of water surface area is detected from the satellites. Next slide, please. So next, just press one more button, thank you. So what this is actually is now showing you the full extent of what we actually model each month. The department, the National Department of Water and Sanitation, which is DWS for short, monitors around about 250 dams nationally using conventional monitoring in situ sort of measurement devices. We monitor all of those. They are the large dams, plus minus 240 of those across the country every month. In addition to that, we can give the volumes for what are called the larger dam safety dams. There's about 5,000 of those. And in addition to that, we also model individually the volumes for an additional 27,000 dams. So we've got about 30,000 dams, just over 30,000 dams that we report individual volumes for. And in addition to that, there's about 250,000 dams, which are typically smaller than 25,000 cubic mecs in terms of the capacity, which are reported from in terms of amalgamating them and reporting them for each quaternary of small catchment areas. So it's a huge volume of information that gives a really accurate picture of the amount of water that's available in the landscape. Next slide, please. This is just an example to show you how we do the calibration. What we're showing here is the comparison between a known height, volume, area relationship in a particular dam as developed by the engineers and so on when the dam is built against what we actually model ourselves. So you can see we can get very accurate predictions of water volume for any given dam. Next slide, please. One of the important things to understand is that the methodology and the capability and the technologies used are scalable. I've just shown you the South African example, how this service has been implemented here. The service, or not so much the service, the technology is scalable to extremely large areas and transportable to other geographical areas. Similar capabilities are being used within all the catchments that are affecting the Okavango swamps in Botswana, and we're also doing proof of concept tests for several of the water areas, catchment areas that affect the Zambezi Basin across SADC as well. Next slide. Thank you. This is just an example to show you that. This was a snapshot that we generated last year. This represents May 2020. So there are terabytes of data from the satellites that have been processed in a matter of hours. And what this map is really showing you is every single occurrence of surface water larger than 20 by 20 meters across the entire SADC region. And this is the kind of information that can actually be generated for any region globally now. Next slide, please. Just to finish off with, before I pass over to Jason, this is just to give you an indication of the kind of variation that happens from a hydrological perspective in any given location. This is the Liuwa Plains in the upper part of the Zambezi in Zambia. And I'm going to just show you a quick time sequence of slides through 12 months from a couple of years ago to show you what we are able to detect and show. So if you can do the next slide, please. Okay, we're starting with May 2017. Next slide, please. June, it's getting very dry. Next slide, please. July, and you can see that as we go through this sequence, the water is only really occurring in the main channel. And you'll start to see when we move past September, October, November, and starting towards the rainy season, the channels will fill up as the water starts to flow again. Next slide again, please. We're going to start to see now some of the pans are filling up, some of the tributaries are coming through here. And February, a bit cloudy in that one, and then March, near capacity, and April, then you've actually got the full capacity maximum level. So next slide. Obviously, having all of those together, you can start to sort of work out then the occurrence of water at any particular point in the landscape at any particular time of the year. Okay, that kind of represents the water information data. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jason now, who's going to take you through the next series of slides in terms of actually actionable intelligence generation. Jason?
Super, thank you very much, Mark. Susanna, if you don't mind moving on here. So I'm just going to talk about dashboards, and we've generated a number of dashboards. What we find is when you're generating information, you generally have one source of information, you present that, but combining that information can actually lead to quite valuable insights into that. I'm going to show you some examples of dashboards that we've generated for Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa. These are aimed at management level, but we can also have operational level dashboards, and they support in providing that management level overview, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals for Department of Water and Sanitation. Can you flip another slide, please, Suzanne? All right, so this one over here is firstly the access to water services. Now, what's quite interesting about this is we've amalgamated that at a provincial level, and it gives you some sort of idea of how well we're doing in terms of service delivery to communities in those areas. Next slide, please, Suzanne. Yeah. So what you've got here is actually a zoom in of that, and what you can see is that by aggregating the information, you lose a lot of the detail related to that. What this shows is that Alfred Nzo area has got quite a low access to water availability, and obviously by having this type of information that's spatially disaggregated like this, you can actually create much better actionable information that is more area and community specific. Next slide, please. This is similar to reliability of water supply. So one is you're getting access to the water, but how reliable is that access to the water? Again, this is at provincial level, and what you can see is that even though people have got access to water here, there's various areas which are getting much less reliable water supply. Next slide, please. And again, if we zoom in, what you can see is the same area that we zoomed into previously, but obviously this is showing a much more dire picture. So although people have got access in terms of boreholes and these types of things in these areas, their access and reliability of that supply is highly compromised. Again, actionable information. Thanks. Could I have the next slide, please? This is just having a look at non-revenue water. So what we're looking at doing is actually kind of linking some of this information together in different ways. But yeah, this is the revenue that's recovered in different areas. And what you can see is quite poor in some places in South Africa, which is actually below, well, there's less than 50% of the revenue is recovered in terms of water that's put into the network. And that obviously represents problems from a sustainability perspective. Next slide, please, Suzanne. This is quite an interesting dashboard, and this kind of links to some of the job stuff that we saw earlier with Bronwyn and Asanafi sort of showing information. This is having a look at drought status, and this gives you an indication of the drought status across the country. And essentially what we're having a look at here is the progression of drought. So we've taken a philosophy where we have a look at a meteorological drought, so lack of rainfall, and then we move into a vegetative drought or an agricultural drought, and then we move into runoff drought where it starts to reflect in the streams and the rivers, and then finally into dams and groundwater resources. And what you can do is you can have an overall dashboard like this. This is at provincial level. We'd like to make it a bit more specific, and we're starting to look at satellite products that do this. And if we have a look at the next slide, thanks, Suzanne. this gives you an idea of a single indicator like rainfall, for instance, and we're charting these different elements. So we quite like to present the information in 3 aspects. One is a map, 2 is the tables or statistics, and the 3rd one is a graph of those. And you can download that information as background information and use it to analyze things. So I hope it gives you an idea of how you could use information from different sources in these dashboards to provide management information to everybody. Anyway, thank you very much. I think that's my last slide. Thanks, Suzanne. So thank you very much. Look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Mark and Jason, for that really interesting presentation. We'll now move on to the Q&A section of this webinar. And please let me remind you, any questions at all that you have for either of the presentations, please drop them into the Q&A box. If we don't get to them live, we'll certainly answer them after the presentations, and we'll be emailing out a Word document to all attendees with the answers to your questions. So if we don't get your question live, please don't worry, drop it into the Q&A box and it will be answered. Thank you. So thanks to the presenters again. I found those presentations really interesting. The first question is really a kind of amalgamation of 3 or 4 that have come in. And that is around this issue of who actually uses the information from these 2 systems, and are there plans or are there initiatives to roll the information out further? So in particular, what elements of government are using it? And secondly, are there community members who also are able to make use of this information? If I could put that first to Ashanafi and Bronwyn, and then I'll put it to Mark and Jason. So Ashanafi and Bronwyn, if you could make some comment on that, please.
Thanks for the question, Jude. As mentioned in the chat box, GEOP's early warning system is implemented hand in hand with the local government. That's at various levels, from federal, zonal, Warda, and Kabele. The data collection model involves GEOP staff, but it's most predominantly collected by government officials. We then collect that data, analyze, clean, and share it back out in those multiple different platforms. As mentioned in the chat box, we also have a community-based early warning component, where that's taking it down a step to Kabele level, where the communities themselves also analyze that data and make corrective actions, be it in terms of flood prevention or other types of measures in their area. So we do try and use this data to influence our own programmatic adaptations. We do share it so that other humanitarian actors can adapt appropriately. We've also built it in such a way that it's very much owned by the government systems. And then we are building in that community level aspect as well to improve their ability to use the data.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn, and it's really interesting. Mark and Jason, would you have a comment on this? Who uses this data, and how is it? Are there initiatives to roll it out further?
If that's okay. At the moment, the primary users are various levels of government, from national, regional, and provincial. The primary one, obviously, within South Africa is the national department, the Department of Water and Sanitation. But we also have users such as the water boards, who manage certain regions. And then internationally, you will have the International Water Basin Commissions. As I mentioned, we're already working with OCOCOM and ZAMCON. And obviously, from that perspective, internationally, for all organizations who share trans-border hydrological catchments, it makes a lot of sense to have the same base data on which to make decisions. Jason, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
No, I think you pretty much covered it, Mark. I mean, we are seeing some interest from more localized and research bodies. So people are interested in using the information for research. And then some of the agricultural communities are also looking to use some of that information. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. I think we are definitely looking to regionalize the service outside of South Africa as well. We've got the South African Space Agency supporting that initiative, and we hope to be moving on that fairly shortly.
Yeah, I think that's important. Is we actually trying to see as that we can roll this out in as many places as possible. So a lot of the data that's being used is collected from remote sensed platforms rather than, and then it's obviously supported by survey and actual on-site data, but we try to make it as generic as possible.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you both. Thanks very much for that. And I'm afraid we only have a couple of minutes until the end of the webinar, but so please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box. We will answer all of your questions. But I'm afraid we will have to bring this to a close now, and I'm sorry we don't have more time to discuss this. I certainly have a lot of questions myself. But both of these, again, thank you very much to the speakers for two extremely interesting presentations, both of them with some intriguing possibilities in terms of rolling these out more widely in the region, and also rolling out the results and the and some of the leverage to other groups and other folks to inform decision making, food security, livelihoods, and so on. So I found this extremely interesting. We'll just before we close, we have a couple more polls, and would be really grateful if all of anyone attending would take a minute or two just to answer those polls. These really help us to focus the webinars, and they help us just to understand where our listeners are coming from. So we'd be so grateful if you wouldn't mind filling in those polls. The first one on how useful are early warning and resilience systems, such as those that we've discussed. And the second poll is on, did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? And you'll also see we've dropped in the chat box there any questions at all to either Kristen or myself. Our email address is there. There are more, there's more information on our webinars on the Scale and ProWash sub-awards on the FSN Network site, which is also in the chat box. And we'll also be looking to host further webinars in future, with perhaps another one on early warning systems too. So please keep an eye on the FSN Network site, and we'll obviously make announcement of that when it's as soon as we know and as soon as we've finalized our plans. So if you haven't filled in the poll, take another second to do so, and we'll be closing that now. I see it's already 9:30 Eastern time. This has gone far more quickly than I would have liked it to. You'll see the poll results are shared on your screen in front of you. And in terms of the first one, how useful are early warning and resilient systems? Well, it looks like about half of us are saying that they're extremely useful and should be rolled out much more widely. Thank you for that. I know we have a bit of a captive audience today, folks who are interested in these, but it's really encouraging to see that people are recognizing the utility of these systems. And then in terms of the second poll question, did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? Again, about half of people said they found it relevant, with another 40% saying very relevant. So thank you very much for that feedback. You still have a few seconds to drop any questions into the Q&A box. We will get to all of those questions. We will answer them, and we'll email them to all of the attendees so that you can get a fuller answer there. So as we close, I'd just like to say thank you again, everybody, for attending. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the fantastic tech team and the interpreter, Zach Heyman, who has done, as usual, a fantastic job. Thank you all, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Appreciate it. Goodbye.